This video is brought to you by Ground News. Stick around to hear more about the special offer they're providing to the entire upper echelon community. All right, I want to make something really clear right off the bat. The title of this video is accurate, in my opinion, but not because I actually want this to be true. Far from it, in fact. I really hope the strike is able to have lasting impact. However, the Hollywood landscape appears to be shifting, and union organized strike efforts right now don't seem like they're going to be effective for much longer. Just to quickly explain the foundation here, because some people very likely don't know what the acronym SAG AFTRA refers to. SAG, S-A-G, is the Screen Actors Guild, and AFTRA, A-F-T-R-A, is American Federation of Television and Radio Actors. Basically, it's a union representing roughly 160,000 actors, announcers, journalists, recording artists, and a whole bunch more, as per their website. Well, SAG AFTRA, for the second time, mind you, has organized a strike, a large strike, this time against the video game industry. But my view is that this version of the strike does more harm than good, despite the fact that I completely support the intended goals here. Because the video game industry is not the same as the filmmaking industry, far from it, in fact. And the technology they're attempting to curb, AI voice acting in this case, has matured to a point where union regulations don't really have enough leverage to stop it. Again, I hope they can help their members get better treatment. I hope that voice actors get compensated fairly, but the new strike by SAG AFTRA just doesn't feel like a winning tactic at all. Just to recap, this isn't the first major strike by SAG AFTRA over the past couple of years. Previously, in 2023 to be precise, they had a 118-day strike against the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, containing 5 major television studios. But that strike ended in relative discontent among voice actors in particular, after the union signed on with a company called Replica Studios, allowing for AI versions of union members' voices if consent was given. Some actors believe this was a complete betrayal of trust. Others believe it was a canary in the coal mine, sort of, indicating that the union was caving to corporate interests. But that was then and this is now, and these two industries are entirely different creatures. In 2023, the strike was organized around better pay and working conditions, as well as provisions against the abuse of AI technology and protections against the exploitation of workers by using their likeness or audio fingerprints without fair compensation. These are good things to fight for, obviously, but now the strike is aimed at the video game industry with an entirely different professional landscape. Be aware, warning, warning, this is where I'm going to branch out and start offering a whole lot of my own personal opinions. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't in different videos, but today is opinion day, so this is what you get. Video games and movies are very different mediums of entertainment. One is static, one is variable, and the value of AI in one is not equivalent to the value of AI in the other. Thus, fulfilling the title here, the current version of the strike by SAG AFTRA is completely useless. All right, before going further here, I want to quickly shift focus and talk about discerning truth in a world of nearly unlimited deception. We, here in America at least, but also globally considering the wide-reaching impact of the political process here, are approaching a presidential election cycle, which basically means the concept of news is about to completely spin out of control. What you see and what you read is a tool by which outside forces can impact your decision making, and that attempted influence is now synonymous with the very concept of news itself in this country. Personally, I don't think that's sustainable at all, but in the meantime, there are certain online services you can use to navigate those pitfalls, one of which that I personally use when making videos and also vetted for roughly 6 months before agreeing to work with them, is called Ground News. You can use the link down below or click the QR code on screen right now to get 40% off unlimited access. Ground News is a data-driven news aggregate service that sources ownership, political leaning, and other contextual information about various news stories so that readers can think critically about the information they consume, comparing coverage across the board. In the case of elections, they have an entire political dashboard of stories, but using an individual example here, such as Beijing pressuring lawmakers to not attend a conference in Taiwan, you can see 22 articles total, 6 leaning left, 3 to the right, and 10 center. These articles have very different tone and takeaway because of a practice it's called editorializing, with some even containing headlines like gross interference, which is not uniform across the board, regardless of whether or not one happens to agree with it. In fact, broadly speaking here, whatever political leaning you have tends to be self-reinforcing, which is why Ground News has a tool called My News Bias, which lets you see what type of content you read and helps to deliberately break echo chambers. In a world of incredibly biased news reporting overall, factual, data-driven analytics of that news becomes even more important. And I'm happy to say that Ground News has partnered up with the channel to give a 40% discount on their Vantage plan, which is accessible by going to ground.news/echelon
or using the QR code on screen right now. Again, 40% overall discount, link down below. Big thank you to Ground News for sponsoring the channel.
Okay, with all that established, the discrepancy in value between these two otherwise very similar strike efforts, let's get into the why. Here goes. For a movie, you can have an AI voice or AI generated visuals, sure, but the product you put forward is completely rigid in its final form. The movie plays, the actors say what they say on screen, that's it, credits roll. However, in a video game, there's basically an infinite canvas of additional dialogue and content that can be added, hundreds of hours long, actually infinitely long, with a near limitless number of potential applications for AI voice technology. Imagine this, bear with me. The player has an AI voice integration of some sort, so that when they chat with NPCs, there's a set of metaphorical guardrails, really, but the player is actually able to type out responses on their own if they don't like the other options that are given to them, and they can steer the conversation themselves. If done properly, the option would also be fully voiced by some sort of program, probably like 11 Labs, which is a leader in the industry right now, and the NPC might have its own LLM integration as well, large language model. Again, with rigid guardrails, right, to preserve the integrity of the game, where it can respond, the NPC can, and hold kind of a mediocre conversation off script. This level of dynamic back and forth does not happen and can't happen in movies, but it also doesn't happen and can't happen with real voice actors. There's no way for an actual voice actor physically to voice all the permutations of dialogue that players will come up with, or that a language model can spit back out in response, which means this kind of non-player character / dialogue evolution requires an AI substitute. Hopefully everyone can see where I'm going with this. These industries are not the same because one of them has a finite amount of benefit attached to the usage of AI, whereas the other has infinite. Think of it this way. Movies are not going to get better because of AI tools. They may get cheaper, they may certainly get faster to produce, but they're not getting better because anything an AI can do, a human can also do. It may just cost more time and take more money. However, video games can get infinitely better through the usage of AI tools, if done properly, because those AI tools allow infinitely increased freedom in a digital world, right, to generate things. Procedural generation means more replayability and broader landscapes. Large language model voices mean better interactive storytelling when hooked up to critical NPCs, on top of more freedom in dialogue. And while I certainly have my criticisms of AI technology in general, okay, don't get me wrong, and of course, many games would and will likely use this technology very poorly, the uncapped ceiling of potential benefit is a completely different creature when compared to legacy filmmaking, which makes the strike an entirely different thing. That's a pretty important foundational difference right there, but all of this needs to be considered in context. Traditional Hollywood filmmaking is primarily dominated by what's called the Big Five, which are the major film studios responsible for pretty much all of the recognizable blockbuster films that come out. These studios are Disney, Sony, Warner Brothers, Paramount, and Universal, plus all of their subsidiaries. Yes, there are exceptions to what I'm saying here, but they're infrequent and they're very clearly exceptions, not the norm. All 5 of these major film studios are part of the AMPTP, which SAG AFTRA obviously held a strike against last year, meaning that there was a decently measurable amount of leverage to be had by denying critical labor to pretty much the entire Hollywood industry. However, the video game space doesn't work like that, and more so now than probably any time over the past few decades at least. The industry is actually dominated by an extremely diverse set of studios producing smash hits outside of the major AAA bubble, as mainstream publishers begin to feel a tremendous amount of pressure. What I'm saying is that video games and traditional Hollywood are not the same. Obviously, I've said it like 10 times. One is dominated almost completely by a coalition of major studios, while the other is witnessing a shift in power dynamics where the big name companies, the major AAA publishers, are actually facing legitimate competition, which, and this is the important part here, completely eviscerates the bargaining position for a union like SAG AFTRA. Let me elaborate on that. When the union goes on strike, they actually prevent their members from working. Reading from their official bulletin right now, quote, "Except as set forth in the Notice of Members regarding non-struck work, all covered services and performing work under the TV/theatrical contracts must be withheld, including but not limited to," end quote, and then pretty much everything you can imagine listed under that. Not just prohibited here, mind you. Workers get straight up punished if they take non-conforming work, which means the union is negotiating with a small subsection of the overall video game industry, as if that somehow binds the entire space to the decisions made in those negotiations. It's a pretty classic case of thinking that you have way more power than you actually do. Expanding on that, the industry doesn't stop moving for them. Setting aside the fact that striking for a third of the entire working year and then striking again less than 1 year later is extremely detrimental to the career prospects of everyone you represent. The technology side of things is exponentially improving itself during every passing day that the strike goes on. The world does not stop turning for them. I won't get too bogged down here, but AI advancements are being implemented across the professional world, for better or for worse. And I happen to think, generally speaking, for worse. A lot of places where AI is getting shoehorned in don't work. But video games, oddly enough, are one of the only places where AI actually does have a tremendous amount of value to add. So it's funny that all this is happening now in this way. Anyway, it's being implemented across the professional world, like I said, such as NBC using AI voiceover summaries for the Paris Olympics, or even full-blown AI celebrities being spun up by brands, which not everyone can tell the difference on, by the way, such as this one, called Fit Aitana, amassing over 300,000 followers so far on Instagram, probably because Instagram is the lowest form of social media, simply consisting of pictures, where AI tech has advanced the most over the past year or two. But anyway, these AI celebrities that we're starting to see are infinitely cheaper for brand advertising deals. That kind of stuff is probably going to start impacting even me dramatically at some point soon. But for now, the prospect of using AI in certain industries is a value proposition that's just far too lucrative for a lot of companies to ever give up or severely curb. Hollywood movies, by and large, are made or broken by the actors. That's the whole point of a movie. Having the right script is a big deal, of course, but you make the bread with the flour and the water, while fully understanding that you can do without having some of the salt. Video games are not the same. Great voice acting certainly enhances the final product, and bad voice acting brings it down several notches, to be sure. But video games are not governed by the actors they employ, or the voice acting that they hire. Video games can be stylized, artistically. They can be remade to feature less dialogue or no dialogue. They can be modified to use motion capture or not to use motion capture based on the availability and cost of labor, which completely destroys the bargaining position for SAG AFTRA, especially when the rules they're trying to negotiate only even extend to about 10 different companies. Once again, I want there to be fair compensation and protections for these workers. I'm on their side. But when you put everything together, it's a pretty bleak picture out there. One, the union doesn't have nearly as much power as they do in traditional Hollywood, as they negotiate with a collection of companies that don't even widely govern the entire industry. Two, shutting down potential labor for months at a time for all participating members is directly harmful to them, which is only offset by the benefit you might achieve if your opposition is harmed even more, which is not the case here. And three, the technology you're attempting to fight against is continuously advancing every day that you're on strike, becoming better and better at not only replacing you, but also elevating the potential creative quality of video games at large by a significant margin, which further increases the amount of damage you have to deal to them short term so that they might sacrifice in some ways long term, which you can't do if you don't have a strong enough bargaining position, which they don't. Bottom line, SAG AFTRA is now striking against the video game industry, and you've probably seen headlines for this all over the place, in a really puzzling and self-aggrandizing display of overconfidence, in my opinion. They might get some sort of deal done, and I genuinely hope that they do, keep that in mind, but we've rapidly advanced beyond the point where an actors union can dictate terms to the video game industry on how or when they use artificial intelligence. I'd love to be wrong, but this new strike feels like a completely useless thing to do in the grand scheme of things, probably resulting in more financial damage to their own members than it could ever recoup in long-term gains. I don't like to firmly believe that, but I do in fact firmly believe it. That's it. As you see headlines about this, just keep that in mind. It's probably a stunt, actually. Probably equivalent in value to just a mere stunt. But anyway, if you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. The video sponsor, Ground News, of course. Also merch, social media, locals, and Patreon for monthly memberships, and more, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, question everything, and have a nice night.